Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining our tips and tricks webinar. Today's topic is EndPoint with Windows 11. Please use the Q&A chat. If you have any questions, we'll make sure we answer those during the webinar. Our presenter today is a threat security architect, Scott Kite. Scott, take it away.
Thanks, Rob. Good morning, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for coming today. Hopefully, what you're going to come out of today's meeting with was interesting, and that's really easy because that's the whole point. We've had a lot of questions about Windows 11, about how we're preparing for it, how you should prepare for it, how we should make sure that our systems are geared up to be able to work with Windows 11. Unfortunately, Check Point has been working very closely with Microsoft to make sure that we are 100% ready to go. Well, obviously, we don't think many enterprises are really ready to run Windows 11 just yet, and there's a lot of background complexity and background issues with Windows 11. Well, issues is not the right term, but you guys know what I mean. I mean, anybody looking at a new operating system probably wants to let it bake for a little while, wait for service pack, all those types of things. But some do not. They want to run it now, so that's fine as well, and we want to make sure that we support it. So we do support it. Just to be clear, Windows 11 is supported by Check Point right now. So you do not need to, wait for a service pack, wait for some update later to get that working, which is awesome. The minimum requirement for that version is E8540. Now, the version numbers and all that you don't need to know too much about them. There's a lot of different version numbers that Check Point has. We've gone through a lot of different updates and a lot of different changes over the course of time. So you're going to see a lot of different numbers and things. But basically, the way the numbering system works is that we have a major release and then a minor release. In this case, E85 is the major release, and the 40 is the minor. E85.40 is the latest version of the E85 train. There is also an E86 train. Both E8540 and E86 are fully supported for Windows 11. So if you go into our release notes, you will find that Windows 11 and, of course, Windows Server 2022, which is based kind of sort of on Windows 11, are fully supported. And when I say kind of sort of, I mean, obviously, if you've been around Microsoft for a while, you'll realize they reuse a lot of the same things between the two, but the interfaces are not the same. Windows Server is still a very pared down overall solution. And by the way, if you hear any weird sounds behind me or anything like that, I have a cat who's deciding right now this is attention time. So my apologies if you hear a weird cooing sound. It sounds like a bird. It is actually a cat. I don't know why she does that. She's a little bit nuts. But either way, the system is fully supported. So what does that mean to us? How do we actually take advantage of that? How do we prepare for it? How do we make sure our systems are ready to go? So there are a couple of things that you have to consider. The first one is, when are you going to do that upgrade? Obviously, for Windows 11, are you doing it right now? Maybe. If you are looking to take advantage of the additional security features related to hardware in Windows 11, since it does support the TPM module in their systems, and previously it did not, or at least not quite the same way. That's awesome. You want to take advantage of that. So that is a base level decision that you guys need to make and figure out on your system side. Do you want to do that or not? If you do, fantastic. Now the next step is, how do we prepare EndPoint for doing just that? It could not possibly be easier. If you've been using EndPoint for a while, you'll probably recognize what I'm about to do. If you've not been using it, if it was turned on and it's just sort of sitting there and it's been working great for the past couple of months, awesome as well. And if you're just here to learn how we actually handle that, I'm about to show you. So the basic gist of the system is that there is an initial install that takes place for your Windows workstations, all that kind of stuff. Once that install for EndPoint is taken care of, you manage versions and features through this console, the Harmony EndPoint console. Now you can see here, I'm in the Harmony EndPoint web console. There is also a smart EndPoint console if you're using an existing system, an on-prem system. Both are equivalent. They both work. There's no problems here. The interface looks different, but it's overall basically the same thing. You have the policies, and they're just slightly, one's webified, one's not. So in this case, I'm using the web interface, and you can see here I have a whole bunch of different policies that affect different systems in different ways. Now, all of these are fine. So I'm not worried about threat prevention. I'm not worried about the data protection, including FDE. These all are fine. There's nothing that I need to change in any of these policies. Where I need to come down to change before I do a Windows 11 update is down here in software deployment. Now, software deployment is where I control the versions of all of the systems that are in my network. In here, you can see I have a bunch of different policies that I apply to my test lab. This is actually my endpoint management system. And you can see I have a whole bunch of different computers. Now, out of the computers I only have 1 or 2 that are Windows 11. A couple of them are Windows 10. A couple of them are VMs. One of them is an ARM version of Windows 11, which is kind of interesting. But besides the point, it doesn't work yet. So we don't support ARM at all. So just be clear, if you give that a shot, it may work, may not. I'm not going to promise anything. But for regular Windows 11, which you're probably all using, this is what you're really going to be concerned with. So in here, I have a rule for Windows 11. You do not need to create a new rule if you have your organization split up, but I do suggest it, at least for testing the initial rollout while you're working with it. Create a rule. And it's as simple as hitting new rule above and then specifying what you need to specify. In this case, I created a rule and then I applied it to my, in this case, a game PC. That's what it is. Typed in game PC. Now you can see I can't select it because it's already selected in a rule. But if I could select it, I would just hit that and hit OK, and it would create this rule. Once that rule is created for an individual computer or a group, if you want to create a group in your AD, synchronize and have that show up here, that works just fine as well. Once that's created, you will see that now I have the capability of selecting what capabilities will be running on that particular machine, as well as the version that will be running on that machine of endpoint. In this case, you can see I have 86.0.007 selected. On the right-hand side, you will see I have more information. This is where you go to actually select what will be installed on this particular machine. So on the right-hand side, you'll see I have threat prevention software installed. I also have one part of data protection. I do not have FDE installed on this particular machine. And then I have the firewall installed on this particular machine. And at the top, you can see I have the version that's installed on this particular machine. So if I hit down, you will see that I have access to all the different versions that Check Point has released over the course of time related to endpoint software. All I have to do is make sure that I have either 85.40.2076, because remember I said 85.40 is the minimum version. So anything that's as 85.40 or above will work for Windows 11, or 86.00. Either one is fine. Either one is acceptable. It's really down to your needs and the specific software, which one you want to use on your systems. I personally will always use the latest ones, but you can also use E8540 since that is based on the E85 train. It's a very solid, been out there for quite a long time train. That is the one that I would generally suggest for the most part. So to select that, all you have to do is hit select. Once it's been selected, now I have a list of software that would be installed on that particular machine, and I have the version number that's set to be installed on that machine. Next step is just to save that change. This does not actually install it. So at this point, I've saved the change, but my machine will not update. It will not do anything. There will be no changes on the machine or the group of machines, either one that you would choose in your environment, your setup. It doesn't happen until you hit install policy. Once I hit install policy up here at the top, this is going to calculate the changes that I've made in the system. It's going to prepare policy files, and then it's going to cause the system to run through a policy update in the background. This is a little bit of a slow process. It will take a minute or two to show that the policy is installed, but it continues to build in the background. So I've started the install policy process. It will tell me that it's done after a minute or two, but just keep in mind that this process actually takes about 10, 15 minutes. So there is some stuff going on in the background. It's preparing everything, getting it ready for the end users, for those computers. This is not an instant process. So just bear that in mind. This is not something you want to do at the last second. But once I've done this software is going to get pushed down to the user's device. And either they're going to be able to select, okay, allow this to be installed or postpone or, that kind of thing. Or if you don't want to allow that to take place, there are some settings that you can change to force this install down to the end user's devices. By forcing it, what I mean is if you go over to client settings on the left-hand side, you'll see over on the right-hand side, there are some capabilities and exclusions and other things that you can set there's a whole bunch of stuff here. If you have any questions about anything that you're seeing today, or if any of this looks a little confusing, please, throw it into the chat. We'd love to answer any questions about it. But it's pretty simple in terms of the installation and upgrade. Go here, client settings, installation and upgrade, and you'll see that I have set enable the user to postpone the client installation or upgrade. Now, this works fantastic for my organization since it's myself and my house and my test lab. In most real organizations, I would have the entire organization would actually have this disabled. So the user would not be able to postpone. The user would not be able to stop the install. The install is going to get forced down to the end user. But it's up to you. You can choose whichever one works best for your organization or multiples. So you can see here, I changed this, and you can see on the left-hand side, this turned purple, which means this policy changed. I can have two policies. I can have a policy for the entire organization where they don't have a selection capability, and I can have a policy for a test lab that I do have that capability, whichever one you want. It's really down to your desires in terms of your organization and your setup. For me, I'm always going to leave it enabled because, obviously, for my test lab, that's the most optimal way to go. Now, once you've done that, and this process has taken place, and the software has been changed, this will be pushed down to the end user device. Like I said, this takes a few minutes before it kicks in on this side, and the end user's computer needs to do an update, check into the system, see how everything's going. Once it's done both of those things, the system will start its upgrade process. And that includes upgrade or downgrade. Now, what happens when that takes place is a number of things. If you have major revision changes between the version that you're currently running. So in here, you can see I'm on 85.40, or I selected 85.40. Technically, that system is already running E86. It will just downgrade to E85. There's no reboots, no anything else that'll be required. That is the case for the most part. Where it is not the case is if you're on an old version, if you're like 83 or so, or before, and you're upgrading to E85, and well, actually, if you're running like I think E80, and you're upgrading E85, there will be a reboot involved. If you're running any of the more modern versions like 83 and above, and you're not running FDE, there will be no reboot for this upgrade. If you are running FDE, there are versions where there will be reboots because of FDE policies. I recommend highly on getting all of this stuff done before you do a Windows 11 upgrade, though. Windows 11 we do not specify any compatibility before E8540. So don't try to upgrade to Windows 11 and then fix the version later. So please make sure that you do the upgrade in the other direction. So. And now there is one caution I'll give you guys. One thing that isn't quite working, and I'm actually trying to research why. I think it depends on the version of backend system you're running. If you're running a specific version of the backend system and you're doing an install, a new install on a new Windows 11 system, if you're not familiar with how to do that, it's pretty simple. Up at the top, you'll see I have download endpoint. If I click on that, I'm going to be given the option to download E86 for any CPU, and I click download, and it's going to download a small 25 meg file. It'll be an executable, and I could use that executable to create an MSI file. You create that right here by running endpoint setup / create MSI. One note, do not use an MSI extractor utility. Please make sure you run this. It will not get the certificate if you pull the MSI out. But the issue is that on Windows 11, when you try to run this, or even with the Create MSI, there's some weird incompatibility. I am working on that, and we'll have that resolved hopefully by the time that you start taking a look at this. But for right now, if you try to run the Create MSI on a Windows 11 system, it will not work. To create the MSI, use a Windows 10 or below system, run endpoint setup.exe / create MSI. It'll create the MSI. The MSI can be installed on a Windows 11 system, no problem. That also, the other thing that will work just fine is if you're using export packages, they work great on Windows 11. Again, just make sure you're in E85.40 or above. So those are the big deal. That's the big thing with Windows 11. Hopefully, that's valuable to you. The other thing I had wanted to quickly talk about was release schedules. So we've changed a couple of things, and we're updating some of the stuff about release schedules, specifically related to how we create updates and how we're supporting those longer term updates. We've looked at a lot of different update schedules out there and different systems, and we're kind of copying a little bit off of Ubuntu LTS, if you're familiar with that. And we're changing kind of how we release software. What it means at the end of the day is we're going to have a single version of software that gets updates that doesn't change any features for 1 year, or actually 18 months, I believe. And then it's fully supported for up to 30 months. And then there'll be versions in between that will be a shorter term support, but it allows us to release more software. So that means, like right now, you can see that we have E8540, and you'll see that there's a lot of updates to E8540. And we're continuing to update it, and you're going to continue to see E8540. But E86, on the other hand, is a completely different version. It's also a shorter version. It's a little bit more. There'll be a lot of quicker updates, and there'll be software versions and all the things that are coming into that. Whereas E8540 won't be getting new features. It'll just be getting the updates to make it work with the existing system. So just keep that in mind. You're going to see some stuff that looks a little bit different than you're familiar with. And that's why we're able to actually support more versions of software and have longer term support for specific versions. So now to kind of like wrap that up into one other thing that I think is important to know is, what about service packs? What about some other things that we've done? We try very hard to make sure our software is available on day zero. Like Windows 11, we were available on day zero. It's not a perfect system, so there are chances that it might not be, but we will always try and strive to make sure our software is available as soon as the software is available publicly. So with that, those were the bits and pieces. I know that might seem really simple, but this is a simple system. Want to make sure that was we were really focusing this on something that you could take away and use as soon as possible. But if there are any questions, if there's anything that has popped up in your mind that's saying, hey, what about this? Anywhere in the system, love to hear about it. Love to know your information. Love to know what's going on. Finally, the one thing I didn't mention, threat hunting. If you're familiar with it and you're using it, it is also fully supported in Windows 11. No changes. So it's just a matter of making sure the software is installed and the policy has the threat hunting turned on. So that's the details. Those are the tips and tricks. Are there any questions?
Yes, we have a couple questions here. One came in, what if they're using BitLocker encryption? You mentioned the checkpoint encryption.
Yep. BitLocker is no different. So in that case, for us to manage the encryption, it works exactly the same way from our point of view. So just make sure, like I said earlier, if they're using BitLocker on Windows 10 and you want to move them to Windows 11, make sure you install the E8540, E86 versions before you do that Windows 11 upgrade. I will not make any promises on upgrading the other direction, because you'll end up in a slightly unsupported setup for a brief period of time, and I don't know what the effect will be. Now, that being said, again, with that version change, there may be multiple reboots required. Obviously, you're going to do the Windows 11 update, so there'll be a ton of reboots required anyway. But just be aware that there may be a reboot required depending upon the versions that you're going from and to. But once it gets into the new system, there'll probably be no more reboots required by our system.
When you were showing the list of versions of the endpoint, the top one obviously said latest. When you scroll down, there was one that said recommended with a whole bunch in between there. So what's, like you said, the top two are the only ones that you can do with Windows 11, but is the recommended version still what you would go with on a non-Windows 11 machine?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that is where we get into like the LTS and get into other versions. This is the older style. This recommended is the older style. There will be an update. We haven't quite hit the point of formalizing it. I think that'll actually happen in Q1. So early next year, you'll see a newer statement. I just don't think that marketing has figured out what right where it is. But this is the older style where we have a recommended version and a latest version. It won't be quite like that. But in terms of, what do we recommend? Realistically, the the threat world never stops. There's always a new problem. There's always a new threat. So while recommended, takes care of all of the major threats that we know. You can run this version and you will defend against all the ransomwares that came out this summer and all the other stuff that we know of. Obviously, the newer versions have more support, more capabilities, more stuff in them. I personally always recommend taking a look at the newest versions, having a lab set up that you have these newest versions installed on to take a look and see how it interoperates with your systems. So just keep that in mind. But officially, E8450 is officially the recommended version. But we'll make updates and we'll make changes to that recommended version on like a 6-month yearly basis kind of thing idea. And then the latest, of course, is the absolute latest version.
Okay. No, this is a Windows 11 talk, but I have a question about Mac and Linux versions and OSs. Any news there?
Yep. So there are a couple things on the Linux versions. People ask me, how do I upgrade Windows? Are they Linux versions? Because there's nothing in here. There's no software deployment, and that's true. The Windows or the Linux versions are updated via the distribution in the system itself. So if you're familiar with how Linux works, if you're on a Ubuntu system, you run apt update. We are adding a repository into the system. So when you do an apt update, there is a repository that points to Checkpoint. So any software updates will come from that. So just make sure that you're regularly running an apt update to see what repository changes have been made. And as we make those changes, they'll get pushed down to your system. So there's nothing in here that you have to do. Now in the future, actually, we are contemplating changing that. But it's a difficult one because there's so many different types and ways Linux does things. So Red Hat is very different than Cent, which is very different than Ubuntu. So that's a little bit more complex. Mac, on the other hand, is moving to the E86 train as well as E85 train. There is an EA currently available on Mac for E85. There are some limitations on that, but the longer term with it is it will fully support the software deployment. When you come to the software deployment, you'll notice here, if you have an eagle eye, you're going to notice it says Windows deployment. With the latest version of the EndPoint system, there'll be a Mac EndPoint version. So you'll be able to actually manage the install from here. It includes everything from software updates, version changes, changes of deployment, etc. That actually is live in an EA. It does not, it is an EA for EPMUS. It is not an EA for on-prem system. So just be aware that it will not work on the on-prem systems yet. It will work on the next jumbo hotfix for E81.1 though. So not the ones that are released now, let's just take 9. It's the next one that it'll be released on, but it'll be fully supported, fully managed, and all good to go. It does support Big Sur and works great on Monterey as well. I haven't tried it on this system with Monterey, the latest beta. I do actually have the latest beta on the system, but I haven't tried that one yet. I know it's not officially supported on the betas, but it is fully supported Monterey and below. It does work on both M1 and Intel, fully supported. And I believe we're looking to have M1 native in the next revision as well. So that'll be end of year Q1 kind of timeframe.
Next question. We are moving towards zero trust and moving domainless, AD-less. Does Harmony and EndPoint deployment and enrollment able to push down software and control install or uninstall?
So a domain is not required to run the system, but we will not push the software to that type of an environment. So basically what it means, and I don't want to scare you on that one, because it doesn't mean that we wouldn't be able to control it. So this machine, like right up here, this particular machine, this game PC, obviously I'm not throwing a game PC on a domain. It's not necessary for me to do what I want, but I want to protect it. So I added the system directly. It's not part of the domain, but I can still absolutely manage it. So all it meant is that I download the EndPoint software and I run it directly on that machine. That machine will automatically register with this backend, and I'm able to manage it from that point forward. So that part is simple. You just have to download it, install it manually, or you need a different distribution method. MDM, obviously your AD list, you wouldn't be using a GPO, but however you normally are managing those systems, you just need to get the initial software installed some way. Now, the organization past that, of how you organize your systems, that's something that I think, honestly, we need to talk about. What's your organizational standards? You could create virtual groups. But that's kind of an expert discussion. It's not really a great discussion for a larger group of people. But if there is something related to that, you can create virtual groups and you can use those to manage the individual systems if they are not part of a domain. But I mean, I'd honestly love to hear more about whoever was asking that question. How we can manage that and help you with your new environment. Just to hear what your story is and what your longer term goals are.
Yeah, just ask that question. Just reach out to me or Scott or your SE, and we can facilitate that conversation if you want to learn some more.
Yep.
I think that covers it, Scott. So thank you, sir. We'll send the follow-up email with any referenced content and the recording link. Our next webinar will be in 2 weeks, so you'll see the invitation for that soon. With that, we'll let you go. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and enjoy your day. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, everybody.